Hello, and welcome back to Let's Write an Adventure, our ongoing live stream where we are creating a completely custom campaign in real time so that you can see all the pieces and parts, all the thoughts and questions and ideas that go into creating a campaign using my method. I'm RJ Kerr, your host as always, and tonight we're going to be starting a new section of our ongoing campaign where we're going to be talking about a simple social encounter and building an NPC for that, and then assuming that we have time, and I'm really hoping we will, since we're using it since we've got an hour. We'll start building out our very next adventure within this campaign, a that takes place in a storm giant's tomb. So, with that being said, if you haven't watched our previous episodes, or you're not caught up, or this is your first time joining us, let me go ahead and give you a quick recap of what we've done so far so that you're not lost. So we are building a completely custom campaign, like I said, and we are building within that our own unique domain of dread. And to give ourselves a little bit of structure to start out with, to give ourselves something from which to deviate, we've decided to use the story circle structure to make sure we've kind of got a loose idea of all the pieces and parts that go into making a good story, a quality narrative. Now, of course, we're not bound by this. We've got lots of opportunity to kind of spread our wings and deviate from this, but it gives us a starting point. So, to that end, we have already done a lot of work in building this out. We have figured out how our characters enter into our domain of dread. It's through a portal that opens up on the blood moon. We've talked about what kinds of personal motivations would draw them through this portal into this domain of dread. We figured out where they land in a shanty town that we're calling Darkport, which sits on the edge of an inland sea. And we figured out that this inland sea is a big part of our domain of dread. It was once the basin of a thriving metropolis, now fallen into ruin and flooded. We've also figured out that the dread lord of our domain is this elemental villain that we're calling Ovander. And we're still figuring out exactly how Ovander plays into the overall structure of the story here. But we've been accumulating ideas for how we might work him in and how he might affect the players through the whole narrative, through the whole campaign. Now, we've also figured out our very first adventure where the characters are where the characters are kidnapped and then briefly enslaved and have to escape their captors. And in doing so, gain knowledge about the existence of a long lost artifact. That gives the wielder some sort of modicum of power over the domain of dread, and the characters realize that this is their best chance for getting out of this domain alive. So now we're working on a proactive section of the adventure, a part where the characters are no longer kind of reacting to the events, but now choosing their own path and their own heading, really playing into their agency, and are getting out of the world to explore and try to find this artifact. And so to do that, we're using a node structure style where the characters can find clues that we've littered around the world by heading out to these nodes or these investigative scenes, these places that they can find additional clues. And they can find some of those clues, all of those clues, none of those clues, but they can follow each one of them to one of these other nodes or investigative scenes, and effectively end up following these breadcrumbs around the world until they get to the solution. And the cool thing about it is they can really follow any path that they want. So it gives them tons of agency, but it also gives us as the DM some structure to work with. So we're not having to create everything on the fly as we come up with it. To that end, we have already started filling in a bunch of those. We have written a simple sort of dungeon for that, a 5-room dungeon using the 5-room dungeon method. We have written a heist encounter where we're using a 5-scene dungeon methodology. We have come up with a complex social encounter that really is more about role playing and different character motivations and how the PCs will relate to NPCs and vice versa. And now we are going to be working on a more simple social encounter and then building out an additional follow on adventure for this. So let's go ahead and let me share my screen and we will get started after I mentioned that this is a collaborative stream. So, and it's interactive. So, as you have thoughts, ideas, opinions, questions, comments, concerns, feel free to jump in the chat and share that with us. Anything you want to talk about TTRPG related, any questions you have, any ideas you have for this as we go along, don't be shy. Share them with the group. You guys are really good with that. You've come up with some amazing ideas as we've gone along here. So, with that being said, hello everyone who's present. We got to see some familiar faces here. We've got Mr. Mex, Fantasy Animal Vegan, Ben Elder, Jonathan Frost, all regulars to the channel. Love to see you all here. Thanks for joining us today. Okay, so as we discussed last time, we are going to be working first on our little basic social encounter here. It's one of the very first investigative scenes that we have. It's an opportunity for these players to kind of orient them, or these characters to kind of orient themselves to get some early initial clues to start their exploration into the world. And they're looking for this artifact, and so we had this idea of the quote unquote historical deep dive, where we have an frankly an aged and wise person within one of the settlements within our domain of dread, who has who has some information about this, somebody they can go and talk to, and sort of coax out some details from them. So we've already kind of jotted down some ideas for this. The idea is that there's characters have to navigate their way. Maybe the characters have to navigate their way through a collection of old tomes and elderly wisdom to find essential clues and facts. So maybe it's a little convoluted for them. Maybe it's not terribly straightforward. We've talked about maybe some history checks to sift through these tomes and manifest in diaries. We've talked about some persuasion checks to kind of keep the this well, we called him the old coot, but we've also called him historian. We've called him the old salt, all kinds of stuff. On track as he, jumps from story to story. And then we've maybe talked about some other sort of contextual clues like perception checks to spot, images of this old salt with the treasure hunter, which is one of our other investigative scenes, and kind of link things up as we go here. So those are just some ideas. We're gonna play with those and we're gonna develop that out as we go. So let's start a new page, just as we have for all of these, and we are gonna call this the historical deep dive. And these are all working titles. It's whatever works for us. Okay, so as always, let's go ahead and kind of clarify our idea here. So let's say idea, the characters have the opportunity to interview and question. I'll say interview and befriend a long-time resident of the Domain of Dread, the DD, who has some important historical knowledge that may help them along their journey. Okay. So let's go ahead and real quick jot down some of our potential clues. We can, helps if I actually spell clues correctly. All right, let's jot down some of our potential clues. We're going to kind of go back to that go section here and just kind of double check what we put down here. We've got the idea, we need a clue that leads to our Wizard's Tower, or that we have as an adventure later on. That's C2. We've got a clue that leads to our sea shanty siren. That's B3, and we've got a clue that leads to our treasure hunter. That's B2. So let's just go ahead and make a quick note of all of that as some of our target clues here. So we're going to say Wizard's Tower, sea shanty siren, and treasure hunters dungeon. And of course, we can always come up with cooler names for these as we move along. So, like I've said, this is the target here is that to make this a relatively simple social encounter. We've done one that is a little more complicated, it's got a few more steps to it, but that doesn't mean we want this to be a boring, um, a boring encounter. We don't want this to be challengeless. We really want this to be something that's interesting and dynamic that just may not take a lot of time. So let's go ahead and start defining our primary NPC here. This is our old salt, as I keep referring to him, which is probably politer than calling him an old kook. Although he's a fictional character, he can be whatever we want. All right, so we're gonna say old salt, and he is going to need a step block. And I think it's pretty obvious that we should make him a commoner. If you disagree with me, feel free to jump in the chat there. But one of the cool things that they've changed in the 2024 stat block for commoners is they have given them all they've put in a training trait in there. So you select a skill that the commoner is proficient in, and they also get advantage every time they make those kinds of checks. So it would be really simple to say that our historian here is proficient in history checks, or in this history skill, and therefore has advantage on that kind of stuff. So we could say commoner with proficiency in intelligence history checks. Easy. Okay. He's going to need a name. I'm going to rely on all of you guys for that name. You guys have come up with some incredible names. And then our basic core structure that we used for NPCs, for example, the Siren or some of the other NPCs that we built out as part of that quest, still holds here, right? So what I like to do for any serious social encounter, right? I mean, I obviously don't do this for like the shopkeeper that mans the general store, unless they're an important NPC in terms of the narrative. But for anybody that they're going to spend a fair amount of time talking to, or they're going to try to have a conversation with, I like to give them an objective, TBD. I like to give them an ambition, TBD. I like to give them a value, well, two values. Oh, what the heck did I just do there? Here we go. Value, TBD, and a secret. Typically, what I call it here, but it could be a secret, it could be a flaw, it could be any kind of lever that we might want to use for something. So I tend to call it a secret, but it doesn't have to be. Okay, and then we also probably want to, since we have not defined where this person is from, we'll probably say location. Location. And I kind of feel Darkport on this. I mean, the characters are starting there. This is an early sort of engagement. This is probably second level characters who are digging into this. So unless there's a strong reason not to, I'm going to say Darkport for that. Looks like we've got a comment from Ben Elder. Says maybe a very old druid. Maybe they even remember the land from before the fall. They no longer reside in the wilds, as the land is much darker and a dangerous place now. We could certainly do that. We could make them a druid sort of character, and we could give them a druid stat block if we wanted to do that. We could keep with a commoner, and maybe they're just a more of a pious individual, or maybe they've lost a lot of their magic over the time as they've aged. We could really play around with that. So if we want to do something along those lines, that's not a bad idea. I could very much see that we have maybe a druid who is not your typical sort of like forest and mountains kind of druid, but one who is a druid of the sea, a druid of the coast, that kind of deal, and so still lives in this seafaring town, and has seen it, has seen Darkport sort of crumble into the sort of gang war wasteland that it's become, um, and is so elderly, so aged that uh, they've lost a lot of um, uh, their connection with the present, right? So they have wandering sorts of stories. They remember old things, but it's harder to keep them on track. I like that idea, Ben. I really, really do. So let's take a look then at the Druid's stat block real fast and see what lends itself, what suggests itself there. So, I've just got D&D Beyond up on the other window here. Obviously, for IP reasons, I'm not going to show that. But, let's be honest, we can all figure out what I'm looking at. So, let's look at the Druid. Yeah, let's see here. Druid's a CR2 creature. Things like Druid Craft, Speak with Animals, Entangle, Thunderwave, Animal Messenger, Longstrider, Moonbeam. Proficient in Medicine, Nature, Perception. Um, so, yeah. So, I mean, that's something that I frankly I would modify some of the spells on that. I might even reduce that a little bit to like reduce their hit points to suggest their age, maybe reduce their dex and strength, their con, that kind of thing. Add the history skill to that, because I mean they are a historian. They should have some sort of bonus to that, I think, if we're going to use that stat block. That's one option. We could also use something like the Acolyte, and kind of see what see kind of how that leans in, because it's a lower CR here, so it has fewer powers, and we might be able to modify that one a little more easily because there's less going on. I mean, not the other one would be hard, but there's a little less going on there. Acolyte's got things like Light, Thaumaturgy, Bless, Healing Word, Sanctuary, all first level spells that you could use in there. We don't want this to be a really heavy kind of spellcaster kind of character here, because we don't necessarily want this to offer more than information. But that doesn't mean that they can't have those traits. So that's something to think about for sure. We've got some other ideas here. We've got Mr. Mex's could be an old elvish commoner that's been alive a long time and has a lot of stories. Yeah, absolutely. 100% could be. That's another way to go about this. Because there's kind of two streams on this, right? You either have to have is this historian character, they either have to have been around long enough to have seen kind of the rise and fall and know some of these things, even if they've forgotten some of the information over time, or they have to be quite learned and that they have done a fair amount of research, and are the yeah, and so they would need to have some explanation for how they know these things, because your characters are going to ask, they're going to get suspicious about things, and they're going to want to know, why does this random person know all this stuff? So it's good to have that answer. And so there's like I said, a couple ways we can tackle this. Jonathan Frost suggests, is it possible to combine and then pare down the pirate and druid stat block into something unique? Absolutely, we could. In fact, I think personally, for this kind of character we're trying to build, I think the straight druid stat block is a little overpowered for what we would want. I like the thematic element to it. And I really think that kind of leans well into what we're doing here, and it makes kind of a simple narrative explanation for why they know some of this stuff. But I would want them to be a little less powerful, and so combining them with what is effectively the bandit stat block. They use they use bandit in place of pirates in most D&D stuff. Um, we could we could kind of merge those together and find a happy medium in there. Because whereas your druid is a CR2, your bandit is a CR1 1/8, and so we can find somewhere in the middle and kind of carve that down. So let's just put this down as ideas because the stat block here isn't as important as some of the rest of this stuff here. We're going to want to have it just because it's useful information. Um, but it's not necessarily something that we have to um, really decide on at this specific juncture. So let's kind of get some of the other traits in here, and that may give us some information. So let's see here, or druid, or druid bandit combo. Dot dot dot. We'll figure that out. Okay, so Ben Elder says maybe a clue for the siren could be a monster hunter. They hunt along the coast for creatures to take trophies or bounties, but he warns them to avoid an area because of the siren. Um, yeah, potentially that could be something that he does, and that could be part of his history. That might be why he knows some of this stuff. Is an old, infirmed monster hunter or explorer. Ben Elder goes on to say, legend has it her voice rang out over these waves even before the coming of the darkness, and none who go looking for her return. Yeah, we could certainly put that in there and add some ominousness to the siren, which we kind of want to do because it is a very dark kind of encounter. And then Mr. Mech says he could be a crazy old man that babbles on about Siren he survived and no one believes in. The party is to try and decipher some of the nonsense. Yeah, I one of the things that I kind of that I've been kind of thinking about for this character is this propensity to kind of wander off on other stories or babble a little bit. And it's some of the challenge here is not so much coaxing him to giving you information, but kind of weaving your way through what's nonsense and what's not. Keeping him on track and that kind of deal, I think, is a an interesting kind of challenge for this. Um, because it requires a kind of a gentler touch, and a lot of the time when you're doing interrogations and questioning things and questioning NPCs in D&D games, a lot of parties tend to lean into this is an interrogation and we need somebody who's going to be hitting hard and asking hard questions and pushing them and that kind of thing. And you end up with good cop, bad cop, that kind of deal. And this is a cool little departure from that, I think, where we could have a far more gentle approach that's useful here. And so we're not leading on intimidation checks and things like that necessarily, although you could certainly do it. Um, so yeah, I think those are all really good ideas. Um, and I think that there's likely that we're going to end up using some, if not all of those. So let's say former Monster Hunter question mark. But let's get into who he is as a character here, because again, I think this is going to guide some of that. Uh, so for any time you create, anytime you're having a real um, social encounter, I will say, in any kind of TTRPG, D&D, whatever, it is incredibly valuable to give that NPC something that they want. Um, because if they want something, then they have a reason to work with the characters or to work against the characters. And so that thing doesn't have to always be sinister or magical or fantastic. As Kurt Vonnegut put it, give your character, give every character something they want in every scene, even if it's just a glass of water, right? And so we can give this guy something relatively mundane that he wants, but that he might use to kind of parlay in with the characters, or he might be fixated on it when he's having these conversations with them, or something along those lines. Ben Elder says the town drunk wants the party to buy drinks for stories, needs sleight of hand checks to keep him happy and talking without getting blackout drunk. Um, Yeah, you could certainly do that. You got to be sometimes you got to be careful with drinking in games if you depending on who is at your table, but a lot of tables are fine with it. So yeah, that's one approach we could do on this. Absolutely. Mr. Mech says, "Is there a spell that could have lasting effect and be the source of the confusion? Maybe the party can figure it out and help him with healing or something. You could do that too. We can make him enchanted. Um, but one of the things that I would say about this is that we have got a lot of we're building out a lot of adventures that have lots of twists and turns to them. We're building out. We've already done a complex social encounter that has a lot of navigating these sorts of role play conversations. That has some complications for both failure and success. We've got other sorts of dungeons and things on the docket here. The Wizard's Tower is probably going to end up being have role play heavy as we've kind of imagined that so far. So, I think that to kind of keep the pacing of this adventure, to kind of keep this from every time they go to one of these places, it's a huge roller coaster because we want some rise and fall, we want some easy stuff, we want some hard stuff, just like combat encounters, right? You don't want them all to be deadly. You want some that are easy, some that are medium, and some that are hard. And the same goes for adventures. When you're doing something like this node structure, well, when you're doing any kind of campaign, but especially when you're doing something like the node structure here, some of them need to be light and straightforward. Some of them need to be dark and complicated. Some of them need to be somewhere in the middle. And I think this one should be one of the ones that is light and straightforward for the most part. Um, so let's hear. Mr. Mech says maybe he has a favorite meal at the inn he can't afford. Uh, could remind him of his younger days or a past relationship. Yeah, it could be something as simple as that. He also might have a fixation. He might have an obsession. One time that I did this sort of thing with in another sort of seafaring campaign that I wrote. I had this interaction with a dragon, and effectively, every dragon has a horde, every dragon has a special interest, right? So, what his objective was he was looking for, he was looking for period pieces to old shipwrecks because he was restoring full size ships in his lair, and that was his hoard as he collected ships. And his ambition was to restore this full craft. And so it was one of the things they could do when they went and talked to him is that the characters brought, pieces from various shipwrecks that were authentic. They could get more information out of him. They could get advantage in their conversations with him and that kind of deal. Not saying we necessarily have to do anything like that specifically for this, um, but we absolutely can. So the thing that I would say then is we're thinking about the thing that he wants. We also should probably think about what is his ambition, what is his long term goal, what is it overall in his life that he wants, and it could be to solve a mystery, it could be to die peacefully in his bed, it could be to be reunited with somebody, it could be all kinds of things. Um, but we want to kind of pin that down so that we again have a deeper understanding of him, and so that we know that when the characters hit on certain parts of his personality, what kind of things they would trigger and how he would respond to that. um, Mr. Mech says where he could just want someone to spend time with him and listen. He could possibly be dismissed by the townsfolk and lonely. Absolutely, he could be. um, he could be. So let's we got a lot of great ideas here. We got a ton of great ideas. Let's start trimming some of these down, and leaning into one theme or the other here. Um, Personally, I like the idea of making him a former monster hunter of some kind. Um, I like that idea because it gives him a little bit of history. It gives him, or I should say, it gives him some personal history. It gives him some reason to know a little bit about adventuring and things like the Siren. And it gives him a reason to be somewhat well traveled. Um, it also gives us a reason that he is a little bit broken, if you will. Hesitate to use that term, but we want him to be a little off kilter. We want him to be a little bit odd, because that's going to make this encounter interesting. If he's just the sort of person that the characters expect him to be from the get go, that is not as dynamic. And so we can still make a simple encounter, but we can make it a lot of fun by subverting a few expectations. So let's say that he was a former monster hunter. Let's go with that as a start here. Um, so if he was a former monster hunter, um, let's kind of work through some of this. We can always add a little history to him because it's relevant here. We'll say TK name, former monster hunter. His mind was lost in the pursuit of his obsession. We could make him a freaking Captain Ahab kind of deal. Yeah, Bellner says, I've seen some things, man, and some stuff, and I wouldn't recommend it. Yeah, I mean, that's effectively what we kind of can roll into here. And so giving him a little bit of a pass like that, giving him a little suggestion of what he was and who he is, gives us some guidance on his objective and his ambition. So, for example, I could see that his ambition is to slay the creature that got away, right? Like he wants to see the death of whatever his white whale is, um, and so that might give us a reason to put some sort of other little terrible monster out in the world and use that later. Um, and so we're going to say he longs for the destruction of TK monster. So maybe he wants. We could say he craves clues as to the monster's whereabouts and condition. And so one of the things that I really like to do I should say one of the things that I really would like to do in this situation, just personally having thought about this since we created the idea, is I like the idea of giving him an obsession because now that gives him something that every conversation kind of draws back to. He's constantly talking about this monster. He's constantly talking about his lost, the buried treasure or whatever. He's this thing that is really the central focus of his personality, which one makes him a little bit easier to play, but two kind of comes back to what we've been talking about here, where he is he's somebody that we have to guide back into the topic at hand, that we have to keep on track, that we have to that we've got to go, yeah, the monster's cool and everything, but we really need some information about this thing over here, and make that part of the challenge of the social encounter. Let's see here. Ben Elder says Elias Bracken, aged dwarf, silver gray hair and beard, weather-worn skin, has an eye patch and facial scars, clutches a large animal fang compulsively in his hand, muttering, I'll get you, over and over. Yeah, I like that. I do. I like that a lot. I would also like to give him a peg leg. For whatever reason, that just makes sense. That's how I see him in my mind. So let's take that, and I'm going to give him a peg leg on top of that. I keep thinking of I don't know if you've seen Starship Troopers, but like there's that scene where they're all where the main character is going and turning his paperwork or whatever, and he goes, and the guy behind the desk asks him what he's signing up for, and he says mobile infantry, sir, and he says, oh great, mobile infantry made me the man I am today, and then you see the full body shot, and he's got a prosthetic arm and legs, and he's just all torn apart. It's exactly kind of how I visualize the Elias Bracken here in my mind now that we've kind of built him out. All right, so Elias Bracken, elderly dwarf, and we'll say Um, description. And we'll say silver gray hair and beard, weather worn skin, has an eye patch, a peg leg, and facial scars from that speak of innumerable battles with wild beasts. He clutches a large animal fang, compulsively, muttering, I'll get you. Yeah, okay, cool. I like that. I think he's kind of starts to take shape. So Mr. Mex's armor made out of the hide of various monsters. I could see him having a suit of armor somewhere in his home, but again, I kind of see him um, as though he is well aged out of the monster hunting lifestyle. Um, he's too elderly and infirmed for that. Um, but we might, put a little treasure in here. Armor made of, let's see here, hide armor, made of various monsters. And then we can say magic, question mark. And maybe that's something that, maybe that's an extra boon that if the characters are really good with him, or lean into some of his obsession or offer to track down this monster form or something like that, he might give this to them or loan this to them, I should say. So yeah, that's a cool idea. Just because this is a simple encounter doesn't mean there can't be cool little wickets in there that we hit. Okay, so we've got this idea of this monster that he's got his white whale that he's after. He is craves clues as to the monster's whereabout and condition. He Now we got to come up with some values and a secret for him, or maybe it's a flaw, or or maybe it's well, he has an obsession already, so it's something else. So let's hit some values here. What would motivate him fundamentally to become a monster hunter? So maybe it's maybe protection is one of his core values. Why the hell did that go bold? The strong must protect the weak. Or actually, protection, we could say, I am a bulwark between the savage wilds and civilization. Something along those lines. Mr. Mex says maybe he helped create the monster somehow and feels responsible for it being out in the world. I mean, yeah, we could do that. That would dramatically change his persona because he would need to have some sort of arcane knowledge or magical acumen or something along those lines, and would kind of, I think that would really alter the idea of him being a monster hunter here. that seems more like a regret is more so than a uh, then again, your Captain Ahab white whale kind of deal. So nothing necessarily wrong with doing that. I just think that that would really kind of tweak our character um, out of kind of out of alignment with what we're building right now. Um, so let's see here. Ben Elder says maybe he keeps slipping in describing his last hunt, a moonless night, fog so thick. I even tossed a coin to the lady to watch over me in the quiet, so quiet, but even still, I didn't hear her. Um, you know, uh, that actually brings up a really good point, and something that I would recommend for a character like this building in, and that is uh, old stories. Um, and literally just giving ourselves three or five little one-liner sort of things to kind of riff off of, so that when he is getting obsessive we have something that kind of as DMs that kind of pulls us into this and gives us something to work with as we're coming up with some of these mutterings. So we'll say um, story actually, because I'm obsessive about this, let me give a little caption here. Old stories. Elias um, frequently drifts off topic into old stories pertaining to his long held obsession with TK Monster. He speaks of a hunt on a moonless night with thick fog, in which he even prayed to the Gray Lady for guidance and safe passage. And then we add a few more like that here, giving ourselves some to deal with. Ben Elder says for motivation, maybe he liked the renown for being known as a badass monster hunter. The wilds didn't hold any danger for. Um, and then plus money. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with making one of the values of a character that they want money, that they want wealth. It's, in fact, it's because there's nothing wrong with it. I think it's an easy thing to lean into with a lot of NPCs, that they can be swayed by gold. That's a core trait of theirs. So I try to stick away from it unless greed is really vital to that NPC. Um, and so, but it's just a personal preference. There's nothing wrong with doing that. I just find that when I let myself make greed a value on you know on anything but just a select few NPCs, I tend to come back to that over and over again. And then it ends up being that most of my NPCs are just greedy and will take bribes and want money and renown and fame and yada yada yada. That being said, renown and the money aren't necessarily mutually exclusive here. So what we could say though is he does like the renown. He likes to be a storied man, as they say, right? Um, Renown. Um, we could say now that I'm into my twilight years, I live through the old stories of my adventures when no one speaks of them, or should say, when the last whisper of them fades I too will fall into obscurity. That will be the ultimate demise. Builder says the hunts were challenging, the money was good, but the glory, they cheered my name every time I walked through those gates, hauling a fresh carcass behind me. Now look at me. Yeah, you could build a little regret into that for sure. This also making renown and making him want to be the center of stories. One, explains why he tells so many of them. But two, going back to our core set of clues, right? Because we came up with this, we needed some initial clues the characters could find very, very early on as they get out of their first adventure to set them off on their search here. Um, and one of the things we talked about was a storyteller of some kind telling tales of a lost artifact. And so, and that was going to point us to this character. That was going to be one of the clues that led us to this character with his historical knowledge here. And so now we could have this storyteller, frankly, talking of, you know, this this old monster hunter's old hunts, and weaving in bits about this legendary artifact and yada 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 into that. So that's something that we can flesh out there now, and it ties into his core values here. It ties into this character, and makes it a more seamless sort of fit, as opposed to just a like, oh yeah, there's this guy you can talk to. He knows all the things, which some games are fine with. That's a personal pet peeve of mine, is when it's like we can just ask literally any NPC, and they're like, "Oh yes, here's all the backstory and information that you need to know about XYZ. I just so happen to be an encyclopedia of everything that's going on in my town." Uh, that that drives me a little nuts. So I like when there is a nice clean link here like this. Um, but I digress. Jonathan Frost says organic NPC development. Yeah, exactly. I'm a big fan of organic NPC development, kind of working our way through this with, frankly, the Socratic method. And usually I'm just talking to myself when I do this. But I think that makes for some. I think that makes for NPCs that feel more real in the world, feel less like you just got on ChatGPT and said, "Give me a bunch of NPCs." Um, so it takes a little more time, but I think it really adds value to the story, like we're doing here. So that being said, we're almost done with this dude. We need a secret for him or a flaw of some kind. We need a couple more sparks for old stories that he could tell, and we probably need to figure out what this freaking monster is, because we need to put it somewhere in the world, right? So what are our thoughts on this? What could his secret be? Um, the um, Let's see here. What could the secret be? What could the monster be? What other kinds of old stories might he tell? Might he kind of rambling back to? We don't need the full story, but just something we can riff on as DMs as we play this out, and pull this information out. Um, so, holy crap! I just thought about something. Um, so coming back to Mr. Mex's comment about maybe he helped create the monster somehow and feels responsible for it being out in the world, right? Maybe I want to adjust that. I want to say that instead of he had anything to do with creating this monster, because I think that would really tweak this character. What if that's part of the clue to the wizard's tower? Is he has a strong suspicion that this wizard was involved in creating the monster? And that his motivations for sending the characters there have less to do with them finding the artifact, although just so happens they can get some clues there on that. But more about he wants to manipulate them into vengeance against this wizard who set this thing upon the world. Um, and so we can work that again into his obsession. So that's a cool way to twist that. So thank you, Mr. Max, for that core idea. That's something we can work in here for sure. Um, let's see here. Ben Elder goes on to say maybe the tavern is called the Harpoon, monster name, and there is a giant stuffed monster on the wall in the tavern behind the bar that's been dusted as the party walked in, and they are pointed to. Um, yeah, we could do something along those lines. Um, so, hmm. Okay. So, to that end, Ben, there is something I love about that idea, Ben, but I want to make one little adjustment. What if, although he has slain plenty of known monsters, he's done lots of good work, what if nobody believes that this last monster actually exists? What if everybody thinks it's a myth? What if they effectively think that he's hunting for the Loch Ness Monster or Sasquatch or Champ or the Jersey Devil or any of those sorts of things? And it turns out that this creature is real and he knows it, but nobody else believes it. And so part of what's kind of driven him mad over the years is that while he is a monster hunter of some renown, that this this obsession of his, nobody will take it entirely seriously. And so we do have a tavern where it is the harpooned whatever this monster is, but it's a joke. Like they honestly think that it's a joke. um, so that could be fun. Let's add that to Darkport. We need a location. So legal system key locations. So we're going to say the harpooned TK monster, and I'm going to say a tavern, beer hall, where named after monster with which Elias Bracken is obsessed. After the monster with which Elias Bracken is obsessed. No one believes this monster is real. So the name is a joke and a mockery of a once great man. Cool. Awesome. Because even if the NPCs don't pick up on that, or even the PCs don't pick up on that, it's just a thing that will make, for example, me as a DM giggle if I was reading through this, right? It would just make me laugh. And there's so much dark stuff in here. There really is some really dark twists and turns in this Domain of Dread, which I think is great. But adding a little levity here and there it really, I think, helps a lot. Let's see here. Jonathan, so Orth says, where squid? I mean, I know you said you're joking, but we could do it. Jonathan Frost says, the monster's a huge eel. Yeah, we could do something along those lines. I definitely think it should be, I don't want to say marine themed necessarily, but I think it needs to have something to do with the water. It needs to have, even if it comes onto the shore primarily, I think that it needs to have some connection to the sea, since this is kind of a sea-based campaign. And Ben Elder says, secret, he had a hunting partner that he left behind to save himself. Yeah. Maybe. I think there's something there along those lines. Let's say, for the moment, trade a former hunting partner. Um, yeah, so yeah, maybe he left him behind to save himself. Maybe when he's injured, he was so obsessed with the hunt that he left his partner just to die instead of trying to get him out, trying to hike him out and lose the trail or something along those lines. I think there's definitely something there. Betrayed a former hunting partner. Um, I like that. I like that as a secret. That's cool. That's cool. Um, let's see here. Jonathan Frost says tying it to the wizard is perfect. We discussed the wizard making crazy monsters. Yeah, we had talked about that, which, to be honest with you, I didn't remember until just now. I know we have it in our notes for that, but that's why we put it in our notes. So thank you. I think that's cool. The See, Ben Elder says maybe he created it in the sense that it hunts the local area because it followed him after he failed to kill it. Um, Potentially, we could go with something along those lines. I like tying into the wizard's tower, making that literally the person who made it. And while he can't prove it, since nobody believes it exists, giving us that link there. And then Mr. Max says, "Yep, totally what I meant. Yep." Hey, so here's the thing, Mr. Max. Half of brainstorming is coming up with ideas and going, yeah, I don't like that one. I don't like that one. I don't like that one. That one's cool. Ooh, that one would be really cool if I make this little twist. And I find that some of my best ideas come from those ones that are like, they're not quite right straight out of my brain and they just need a little adjustment and they make a great idea. And so that's exactly what we've got right here, right? That idea wasn't perfect for this NPC, but it's perfect for another NPC. So it's always good to hold on to that stuff because it is a good idea. It's just a matter of where we put it in. Orth says, well, if the townsfolk don't believe him about the monster, means the townsfolk need a reason to not believe him other than old age if he did kill so many monsters in his youth. Yeah, that's correct. They need a good reason not to believe him. And that is an interesting bit of his history. Why doesn't the town believe him? So let's put a little note here. Why don't people believe TK Monster actually exists? The simple thing with that could be that nobody's ever seen it, right? Piece told story after story after story. But nobody's ever actually seen it. He's brought back no concrete proof that it exists. All the proof that he's brought back has been proven to be from some other kind of creature or whatever. And so I think it's just a question of time, right? Over time, his credibility has eroded. At least that's probably how I would address it on this. But we could go all kinds of different ways on that. Frankly, if we want to get really mystical about this, I don't know that it necessarily fits in this particular story, but you could do something along the lines of maybe the people who see this monster can't remember it. It is part of this monster stat block that it modifies memories of people within a certain radius of it so that they forget that it exists. And for whatever reason, Elias Bracken is immune to that effect. And so he's the only person who has seen the monster and remembers it. We could do something along those lines. Again, I don't know that that necessarily fits into the world we're building here, but it is an idea. Go forth and use it. Feel free. Okay, so Bellner says, don't mind him. Too many knocks on the head. He actually believes he's there's a giant monster out there. Yeah. Crazy old Maurice, says Mr. Mex. Yeah. Jonathan Frost says, are we going to give the characters a Jonah and the whale or Pinocchio and the whale moment? We certainly could. If we wanted to build out this adventure into hunting the monster and making it kind of a side quest sort of thing, we absolutely could build a 5-room dungeon around they get swallowed by the monster and now they're running around to the inside of it and have to get their way out. We could absolutely do something like that if we wanted to. And depending on the adventure, that could be very interesting. Um, uh, Orth says, I mean, it would be possible for a wizard to manipulate townsfolk into doubting him for some reason. That's a good thought, too. I hadn't really considered that, Orth, but that is a really good thought. That's very in line with like season one of The Witcher kind of thing, right? Where you have the wizard who uh, affects everybody's memories uh, so that they are against Geralt, um, and think of him as a threat. And that I want to say the first episode of the series. Sorry, spoilers. Um, so yeah, that's something that we could absolutely do in there. That could be a reason. It could be another reason why he hates this wizard so much. Maybe there is this intense rivalry around them. Maybe they are or I guess more than a rivalry, there is this hatred of each other that they've grown up over the years, and the wizard is only not as infirmed as Elias because the wizard is magic and has slowed his aging down or something along those lines. That could do it. So let's say passage of time with no proof. It's an option. Let's say wizard manipulated memories of the townsfolk. Let's just say the townsfolk. As a possibility, we could put a couple other things down here. Okay, yeah, we can work with some of that here. Let's see here. Jonathan Frost says Ben Alert following him sounds like Jaws 3 knockoff. Yeah. Mr. Mex, spell of mass suggestion from the wizard. Absolutely, we could do something along those lines. Ben Alert says maybe if the monster made it, it's unique with abilities a simple beast shouldn't have. Yeah, I think we're at the point now where this has to be a unique stat block. I agree with you on that. We're gonna have to make one for it. And then Jonathan Frost says or I'm sorry, Ben Elder says Jonathan Frost. That popped in my head in regard to Joan and the Whale and the Pinocchio thing. Yeah, we can absolutely do it. There are adventures that take place in the giant brain. This is our imagination. We can do whatever we want with it. So we 100% could build out something like that, depending on how built out we get this monster. And there's nothing wrong with creating side quests as we create this adventure that can give the characters a little reprieve from the main story, but also give them little boons that they can find to help them out through this main adventure. Or it says, the reason he's immune to the memory thing is the armor. Maybe the magical boon on it is like beast instinct that prevents the memory problem from the beast. Ooh. You're right. Let's capture the beast idea and then let's mention that in the armor. That's a cool idea as well. So let's see here. TK monster has a innate effect that makes those who see it forget it, but Elias is immune. Perhaps the armor is what gives Elias his immunity. That's a cool idea. I like that. Mr. Mex says, or the possession of the Fang. That could work too. I had thought of the Fang as a talisman of some degree, but maybe it is the only piece of the monster he has, and by possessing that piece, he is immune from its memory affecting or memory altering effects. That could really be the case. Interesting. Damn, these are some good ideas, gang. These are some really good ideas. Like I said, you guys are incredibly creative. So much cool stuff. That being said, we are at the end of our time here. And so we are going to go ahead and wrap up this. Silly me, I thought we could create this in one session. We were so close. But we've come up with some such amazing stuff here to make it such a dynamic encounter that yeah, why cut ourselves short? Why do that? So we'll come back. We'll finish this up. At this point, I think we're going to be finishing this up on Monday since we're doing a special episode on Wednesday where we're doing, by your request, we're going to do a DM Q&A session here. So as you have questions about, um, about DMing or running your own games, writing your adventures or actually running them, managing players at the table, anything related to DMing or GMing, please tune in on our Wednesday episode this week and ask those questions. You can send them to me ahead of time by asking them in the chat to any of my videos, or you can hold on to them and ask them in the chat here as we go through. And then, of course, as ideas or questions pop into your head while we're doing the stream, you can always toss them in the chat, and I will answer as many of them as I possibly can. We've already got some of those questions that have been streaming in from some of our regulars here, so I appreciate you all getting the jump on that. But I am looking forward to having that conversation with you all on Wednesday. So again, if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, leave a comment. All that kind of stuff helps the channel grow, helps keep these chats very dynamic, and helps keep these great ideas flowing. So with that, I hope to see you all on Wednesday, and I will talk to you all soon. Have a good night.